Okay, shalom and welcome to Beginning Biblical Hebrew. I'm Ross Nichols, and this is our third class together. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'm hoping that these classes will be beneficial for everyone who participates. Just wanted to start off and remind you about these handy charts that are available on our Facebook group page. This particular one that I'm now holding represents lesson number 1. In lesson number 1, we talked about the Hebrew letters. And you'll notice on the chart, if you haven't taken the time to download these yet, I would highly encourage you to do so, because if you download these charts that I will be talking about this evening, you will not need to purchase anything or look around on the web. Hopefully these will be sufficient. But if you'll notice in the Hebrew letter chart, this is what we covered in class 1. We went over the number of the letters. There are 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. We covered, based on this particular form, we covered the names of the Hebrew letters, the forms, the English approximation, as well as certain special considerations, characteristics concerning the Hebrew letters that you would need to know. So if you don't have this chart, please go to our Facebook group page and download these. They're also available on our website at unitedisrael.org. That was lesson 1. Hopefully you have mastered that, but if you haven't, no problem. You're welcome to audit this class. You can go back and watch the videos at your convenience as many times as you'd like, and they'll be just as good or just as bad as they were the first time you watched, because we won't change those. They're up there for good. They're up there for your good. The second class that we covered in lesson 2 was the Hebrew vowel sounds, the Hebrew vowel sounds. This chart is the second chart that is available on our Facebook group page. And this basically covers what we call full vowels, as opposed to half vowels, which we'll begin to talk about in this evening's class. But just like on the Hebrew alphabet chart, we have similar columns on the Hebrew vowel sounds. You'll notice that we have the Hebrew name of the letter, which you'll learn how to read very shortly if you've not already mastered this. The names of the letters represented in transliterated form, which means that they're spelled, the names of the letters are spelled with English letters. And then you'll notice the next column indicates whether or not the vowel sound is a long or a short. Now, one of the things, we'll be talking about that a little bit more later, because it's very important that you memorize, that you learn whether a particular Hebrew vowel sound is long or short. Now, one other thing I noticed, because I saw various notes on the Facebook group page, is there was a little bit of confusion. I might not have explained very well. If you notice in the column on the Hebrew vowel sounds chart, the form column, I have represented on my magic board here what you see in the first block on the Hebrew vowel sounds chart. You'll see a Hebrew letter Aleph, and you will notice that there is a kametz located under the Aleph. And notice that our chart represents what you see on the board. The Hebrew letter is in black. The vowel sound is in red. Now, the only reason that I put an Aleph there was just as a placeholder so that you could see where you will find the vowel sound located in a printed text. So I could, technically, I could use another letter here. I could put, I'm just going to grab this out of here. I could put the Hebrew letter Vav. But the point was, I wanted to use a letter so that you could see the placement of the vowel. So hopefully that answers the question that I saw on the Facebook group page. And now you're good to go. So you are probably as excited to get into Class 3 as I am to bring you into Class 3. So here we go. I want to start back with the chart that you should have in your hand at this point, and I just want to make a couple of points. Again, everything that you see here, these are going to be called full vowels. Full vowels. And as I started off the class in my introductory comments, by the end of the class, you'll be introduced to what we call half vowels, but only barely. In other words, we're going to get into this more over the next week, and by that point, hopefully I will have another chart for you. But I just didn't want to put it up too early because I know that there are quite a few people who are just beginning to get traction in understanding what they're looking at, and I didn't want to burden you at this point. So stay tuned for that. Now, as I look at my chart, my Hebrew vowel sound chart, again, look at the column that says long or short. It's located about 5 columns in. You'll need to know whether a vowel is long or short. You'll need to be able to distinguish between these two at a later point. I'm not so concerned with this in the immediate future, but as we get into further classes beyond this initial 5-class series, you'll begin to notice and you'll begin to know that you have to know to distinguish between long and short, because it becomes essential when we're talking about the formation of certain nouns and verbs. So don't get so hung up on, like in English, we think, well, a long vowel makes this sound, a short vowel makes this sound. Don't get so hung up on that. If we say in the chart that a vowel sound is long, I want you to get that down and memorize it. You can make flashcards. I've noticed that quite a few of our fellow students are very, very helpful, and they're finding apps and other things on the web that can help you memorize these letters, these similar looking letters, these vowel sounds and the names and all of that stuff. So, by the way, thank you for all the help. Many of you are doing a fantastic job on the Facebook group, helping me to facilitate that. Now, one other thing on this chart. If we look at our Hebrew vowel sounds chart, you're going to notice that there are 4 instances where not only do I have the letter Aleph, but also have the letter Yod, the letter Yod. And I'm going to put that up here, and I want you to think about, let me move this out of the way, and I want you to notice those 4 columns. Actually, 2 of them have the Yod, and 2 of them have the Vav. So I think I'll go ahead and demonstrate both of these at once so that you're looking at what I am talking about on the chart. Do you notice that we have a Tsere Yod? I'm going to replicate that for you here. In fact, let me move this over here. Okay. This is called a Tsere Yod. Notice if you look at the column, if I don't have the Yod and I just have these 2 dots side by side, then that's going to be a Tsere. If I put the Yod, it's a Tsere Yod. Okay? Notice that both of those are a long sound, a long vowel. Okay? Now, if you look down, you will also see this in your chart. This is called the Hirik Yod. Okay? And if you notice on the chart, this is a long vowel sound. I have to go through some of this tonight, so bear with me. If you take the Yod out, it's a Hirik, and it is a short sound. And we're going to be talking about this. So did you notice that the only thing I did to match what we did, to replicate what we have on our chart, is I put the Tsere to make a tsere yod. Remember, the aleph is just to be a placeholder. And if I put the kerek on, it's a kerek yod. Okay? So you'll see that. Now, if you look down, you will also see a couple that employ the vav. All right? Now, I'm going to slide this down just a little bit so that it is visible for you. Notice that I have the aleph, which is just a placeholder here for my vowel to demonstrate where that would be placed. If I place this over the vav, it represents look at your chart, see that? It represents a cholam vav, This does. This is our placeholder. All right, you see that on the chart? Now, if you see this in the center of the vav, look at your chart, you'll see that that is a shurik, and you can see the associated sound, the English approximation with these. Now, one of the things that I want to point out tonight as we begin our discussion of the Hebrew vowel sounds a little bit further into this than we got last week is that when you look at these particular vowel sounds, you see how easy it is to distinguish. If you look at the chart and you look what's on the board, it's fairly simple to tell what we're talking about. Now, last week, we discussed something that's very important for this class this week. Everything builds one upon the next. If you remember in last week's, we talked about the transmission of the text, bringing it faithfully from generation to generation, and that the vowel sounds were originally designed so that we don't lengthen the text. If you recall when I talked about the scribes, in Hebrew the word sofer is one who counts. So we're not allowed, remember in class 2, we're not allowed to add to or take away from the text. So there is this very strict system of rules that the scribes would follow to ensure that we don't add to in terms of adding any consonants to the text, right? Now, one of the things that I wanted to do so that you can take a breath before we get into a little bit more depth as we work through tonight's class is take a moment and talk a little bit more about the scribes and how they ensured that the text was accurate from one generation to the next, from one copy to the next copy to the next copy throughout the ages. Now, according to what I've told you about scribes being those who count, there are notes associated with the Masoretic text of the Hebrew Bible that are quite fun and interesting. So this is just a tidbit of information for you that you can put in your notes that I think is quite interesting. If you're a person, if you're a scribe, and you're one who counts very faithfully all the letters of the Hebrew Bible, you'll notice that according to the notes, the center verse in all the Torah represents the 5 books of Moses. According to the Masoretes, this faithful group of scribes, the center of the Torah, the center verse, notice I'm going to hold my Torah so that you can see that it's roughly, even in this with any introductory comments and so forth, this is the halfway point. It comes to us at Leviticus chapter 8, verse 8. So just for your information, the center verse of the Torah reads and says this, Leviticus 8:8. And he set the breastplate on him and put the Urim and the Tumim into the breastplate. Now, if you were looking at the Hebrew in a standard Orthodox text, you would see the note from the Masoretes which says, this is the center verse in the Torah. So put that in your notes. Now, What about the center word? The center word in the Torah comes to us. It's found in Leviticus chapter 10. In other words, if you counted all the words in the Hebrew Bible, the next question would be, would you think there would be an even number or an odd number? I'll give you a couple of moments. You'll have to be honest with yourself. I want you to make a determination. If the Torah is holy and just and perfect, would it have an even number or an odd number? Write your answer down. It has an even number. An even number of words according to the Masoretes. And if you were to find the center, therefore, and there are an even number of words, what would you find? Would you find one word or two? Well, you would think, write your answer down. It's kind of a trick question, because the center of the Torah, if it's an even number, would have two words, but it just so happens that it is the same word repeated. So in Hebrew, one of the ways that they indicate the superlative is to duplicate a word to indicate stress. So for instance, instead of saying diligently seek, one would say seek. Seek. You would repeat the word for emphasis. So the center word of the Torah, in this case, the two words that make up the center of the Torah, comes from Leviticus chapter 10 and verse 16, and it says, "And Moses inquired diligently." See, they put the word inquired in. The word inquired is there, but diligently is generally supplied because it indicates a sincere seeking. And Moses inquired diligently about the goat of the sin offering, and here it was burnt. And he was angry at Eleazar, at Ithamar, and at Ithamar, Aaron's sons who were left, saying, and then we go into verse 17. So if you're looking for the center word, now the reason we know this again is because the scribes are those who count, and they faithfully counted and determined that this is the center. But it gets even better than that. You'll be able to win a trivia contest with some of these people if you're paying attention. If you wanted to know, but Ross, we now know the center verse and we know the center word, but what's the center letter of all the Torah? And that's found in Leviticus chapter 11 and verse 42. 11:42 says the following: "Everything going on a belly and everything going on four, as well as everything having a great number of legs, of every swarming creature that swarms on the earth, you shall not eat them, because they are a detestable thing." Within this verse, in the original Hebrew, the word belly has the Hebrew letter Vav within it, and the center letter of the Torah, according to the scribes who count, is found in Leviticus chapter 11, verse 42, in the word gachon, which means belly. So there you have it. A little bit of fun trivia, and we're talking about the accuracy of the text, and those are the things that I wanted you to get at this particular point. Now, I will get notes from time to time where people are saying that the audio or the video, we might have difficulties. Generally, when the class is uploaded, those difficulties are gone. It's sometimes on this end, it's sometimes on that end, but if it is too difficult to bear, log in very soon and you will see it once it is completely uploaded. Now, so here's the point. Whether a text is pointed with vowel points, such as you see on the chart, or whether it's unpointed as the scroll that we showed you in a previous class, the number of the letters should remain the same. So the vowel system that was designed has to be indicated in such a way as to not add to the number of the letters, because that is one of the tests to make sure that we are faithfully bringing it throughout the generations. Now, this means to us that the thing that I demonstrated at the beginning, that the Vavs in the Cholam Vav and the Shurik and the Yods in the Tsere Yod and the Hirik Yod were already present in the consonantal text of the Hebrew Scriptures, if that makes sense. In other words, before the system of vowel points, these dots and dashes that I am demonstrating for you, before these were added to the text, these vowels which are indicated with a yod or a vav, those letters were already in the text. These would be what we discussed in class 2 as mothers of reading, okay? Now, there are words that are sometimes spelled with the mother of reading, and those are called full spellings. And at other times, the same word or the same name is spelled without. I'm going to demonstrate this so that it makes sense. And I have to cover this at this point so that as you begin to read the Hebrew and you begin to see these kind of things, this is imperative to get. This is important for you to understand so that you don't get thrown off with this. So most of us know of the great King David in the Bible, okay? We know David, D-A-V-I-D in English. And if you will remember the previous teachings, when I'm representing in English letters a Hebrew word, this would be called transliteration. It's taking a word that's in one language and representing that word with the letters of another language. So what I want to do, I want to tell you that the name David, according to the Hebrew Bible, if you do a search for the number of times it occurs, you will find that David, I'm going to pronounce it more biblically correct very soon, you'll see that David is used 930 times in the Hebrew Bible. 930 times in the Hebrew Bible, and I am going to pull out the necessary letters. Okay. I won't be needing the aleph. Now, I will have to make a few spelling changes today. So we're going to represent the name David. Notice I'm going to transliterate. So Hebrew is right to left. Transliteration in English is left to right. Okay? So this represents the D sound. Okay, everybody see that? So you can connect those two. And then I will use this Hebrew letter. Now, how many of you know what this particular letter is? Look at your chart. 1 second. Stay with me. I'm going to pull up a Hebrew text so that I can look at a couple of things quickly. Technical difficulties, please stand by. Excuse me, the Hebrew teacher put the wrong letter up, all right? So that is what happens sometimes, all right? That's what I wanted to check. I did that just off the top and missed that. So just delete that whole video. All right, so we have in this particular spelling, I'm going to spread this out a little bit so that you can see. And then this represents the consonants of the name. So I'll underline those with my red marker if I can find it. And 1 second. So remember, this would go here, the V sound and the D sound, if everyone can follow that. Now, this particular spelling of the name would be called, and remember we're talking about sometimes it is spelled with the mother of reading, with the vowel letter in the word, and sometimes not. The name David occurs again 930 times, many times in this particular form here, but in 246 occurrences, I'm going to put this letter in so that you can see. In 246, you'll see the yod. The yod, okay? So, I'm going to scroll down here and look at this. Now, in the spelling of the name, you'll notice that this particular spelling of the name, you'll see that it's spelled with, notice the letter and then the vowel. Now pick up your chart, your vowel chart, and determine what vowel sound this is here. Can you see that on your chart? All right. Giving you a couple of moments. Now we have this vowel sound, and the way that we're going to read this is, you know that this makes the D sound, you know that this is ah, so you have da. We know that this represents our V sound, and this, if you look at your chart, is what vowel? The Hirik Yod, the Hirik Yod, and it makes the E. So it's David, David. Now, if I spell it like the Hebrew Bible does quite often, without the Yod, it's spelled in this way, and it's still pronounced the same. It's David, okay? Now, 246 of the 930, same name, spell it in this fashion. Now, the reason that I bring that up is because as you work through the Hebrew Bible, you'll notice at times that you'll see a different spelling. In fact, this occurs not just with the name David, with the name Jerusalem, with the place name Jerusalem. You will see it sometimes spelled with a yod, and then sometimes you'll see it spelled without. Now, I'm going to spell one other word, assuming that my spelling, I know that people think that's real funny, but assuming that I can spell this correctly, I think I'll look this time. What we're going to do is, I'm going to spell a word that some of you know the English word for it, but you might not know the Hebrew, but it is a fairly common word, and so you might know it in Hebrew as well. All right, so we're going to spell, I'm going to put it up on the board so that you can see it. Make sure that that sticks. All right. Now, I'm going to take this out of the way for a moment. Now, these are demonstrating. What I wanted to do is to demonstrate for you variations in spelling, but different ways to spell the same word. Okay? This particular word, all we have at this point are the consonants of the word. And so I'm going to put some vowel points here. What vowel is that? Look at your chart and identify that, please. And you see the word, all right? So we know that this makes what sound? An ah sound. So we have ka. This is the equivalent of the English approximation of the letter D, the D sound. This is the dalet. And this will give it the O sound because we're talking about a holum, okay? And then this is our Hebrew letter Shin, which represents SH. So if you put this together, the word that we're looking at here, it's a holy word. The word is kadosh. Kadosh. And kadosh means what in English? How is it generally translated? It's generally translated by the English word holy. The English word holy. So this is kadosh. Now, there are times, I'll give you an example of this particular spelling. If you go in your Bible to Deuteronomy chapter 26, Deuteronomy 26, I just want you, some of you have already purchased a Hebrew Bible, and if you haven't, don't do it if you don't have the money, but I'll recommend some so that you, when I give these examples, whether it's the center word or the center letter, you can begin to mark those things. But in Deuteronomy chapter 26, verse 19, 26:19, let's see. I'll have to find this. I'll have to do another search. I wrote down the wrong passage. I apologize for that. I'll post it on our Facebook page. What I was looking for is a particular passage. I know what it is. I think that the numbering is different. One second. Okay, here we go. In Deuteronomy 26:19, and it says, we'll start in verse 18, and the Lord, this is God's name, proclaimed you today to be a treasured people to him as he spoke to you and to observe all his commandments. And here's verse 19, and to set you high above all the nations that he has made in praise and name and beauty, for you to be a holy people to, as the Jewish people would say, Hashem your God. This is God's name. Your God as he spoke. So in this particular passage in Deuteronomy 26:19, the people of Israel are told that they are to be a kadosh people, a holy people. And the spelling is as I have it here on the board. Now, there is a different spelling. This spelling would be called defective because it's not spelled with the fullness, meaning it doesn't have the mother of reading in it. Now, I'll give you an example. If you go to Exodus chapter 19, in Exodus chapter 19, this is another passage about the people of Israel. In Exodus chapter 19, and it says in verse 6, you will be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation to me. A goy kadosh, a holy nation. But in this particular passage, we have the spelling that is full. In other words, this particular spelling has the vav in it as such. Kadosh, kadosh. And you can look these up. This is Exodus chapter 19 and verse 6. Same spelling, basically, or the same pronunciation, but notice sometimes it's spelled with the vav, sometimes it's spelled without. It's pronounced the same way. Now, there's one other thing that I want to demonstrate for you when it comes to this particular spelling and this particular use of the vowels. We're going to be talking particularly about the vowel on your vowel chart. Look at your vowel chart. The Hebrew vowel sound of long O, you can find that, is represented two ways. It's either represented as with the cholam, as I have here, just the single diacritical mark, the single dot, if you will, and it can also be represented with a Hebrew letter Vav with the mark. It's same pronunciation, either just the dot or with the Vav, see? All right, so in the case with the Vav, it's called a cholam Vav. Without, it's simply called a cholam. Now, the reason that I want to talk to you about this is that there are times, I'm going to show you an example where a very common word, let me think of an example, okay? Let's see. Put these up so that they don't get confusing. I noticed, by the way, in the last class that I left a word up and I was talking about something else with that word still showing, and I thought, wow, that might confuse someone. So I'm going to try to keep the board clear as I change examples so that I don't confuse people. Okay, now, some of you have heard of the man named Moses. We're going to talk about Moses for a moment. And I'm going to show you something about the spelling of Moses' name. Now remember with David, with the name David, even though we say in English David, in Hebrew it's David, but with the name Moses, it's a little bit different because David, is transliterated fairly accurately. If you look at the Hebrew and you look at the spelling, it's easy to connect the two. In the case of Moses, his name in Hebrew is Moshe. So you have a mem, you have a sheen, and you have a hey. Now, in the second syllable, she, that's represented in Hebrew. These would be good examples for you to see how it's pronounced. Moshe. All right. So we see here that we've got, look at your vowel chart, your Hebrew vowel chart, and see if you can find this particular Hebrew letter. All right. You'll see that it is an E sound. All right. Now, here's the question. If I told you that this says Moshe, where is our vowel? Now, you could do it like this. You could write it like that because we know it's a long O. We know that a cholam is going to give us that sound, but it's not indicated here. But what if I told you that that is and does say Moshe? Now there is something that I wanted to show you today in this class because it's something that we'll be talking about as we work through some various examples. You'll see it from time and again. There's no cholam currently up here, but I just told you that it does say Moshe, and let me tell you why. Notice that the diacritical mark over the Hebrew letter sheen, all right, this is always on a sheen. But whenever, at times in a printed text, you could do it like this, but there are times where this cholam coalesces. It combines and serves in two purposes. It serves as the cholam, making the O sound, and it also serves its original purpose on the sheen. I'm not trying to confuse, I just want to show you this particular thing that can happen. So what this means is it's called coalescing whenever these combine. Now in English, here's what that means. In very simple language, it means that one dot can serve two purposes. That one dot can serve as an indicator that that's a sheen and not a seen, but it can also indicate the long O sound of the holum. All right, so that's perfectly acceptable. You might see that in the Bible as we work through various examples later, and you won't say, well, there's no vowel. What do I do here? The same thing can happen whenever, let me think of an example, where the holum follows a seen. Okay, remember the letter seen has the diacritical mark on the other side. See how this is here? So if I have this example, let's see. And make sure I'm not off the camera here. Okay, now this particular word, I'm going to put us a couple of vowels up in just a moment, and I'll make the same point, just like the letter sheen would coalesce with the vowel holum. It can also happen here, all right? If let me find a seri. In Hebrew, the word for enemy is soneh. And this diacritical mark, I could have the holum here, but in this example, as before, this coalesces and becomes one dot, one diacritical mark serves two purposes. It indicates that this is a sin and not a sheen, and it represents the holum in the word soneh. Now, does that make sense? All right. Now, I promise you that if you read this in a grammar book, it might be a little bit more complicated. I've tried to take that concept and just make it as simple as I can, and in the process, hopefully not messed anyone up. I'm going to move my vowels over here. We've got some more examples to go through. And, okay. How's everyone tonight? Hopefully we're all doing well. Okay. Now, so far we have covered the vowels we pretty much have covered everything on our vowel charts. And the previous week we covered the letters. So now we're going to begin a journey into what we call half vowels. And I intend to cover some basic rules related to these half vowels as simplified as I can, and I'm going to only introduce you to one this week because I think by the time I get through this particular part, we will have covered enough for you to have to think about and digest and watch it a couple of times. All right, so we're going to talk today about the half vowel called a shiva. We're going to be talking about the we're going to be talking about the vocal Shava. Now, when I say vocal Shava, you ought to be thinking, I wonder why it's called the vocal. Does that mean that there's a silent? There is a silent Shava. You did an excellent job picking up on that, but we're not talking about that tonight. We're going to talk about the vocal Shava. We are talking about that in the context of half vowels. And so we're going to call the Shava. Now, I'm going to put it up on the board. I'm going to use a Hebrew letter just as a placeholder, and I will put the Shava underneath it. Notice it looks like a colon in English, whereas we would see it on the line with the text in English. In Hebrew, this half vowel, the vocal Shava, is going to be located underneath the line, okay? So this is what we're talking about now. I'm going to make a few points about it. Now, put this in your notes, that this Shava, it can only be under non-guttural letters. Now look at your chart. I'm not going to put these on the board, but I want you to get your Hebrew letter chart out. And if you notice in one of the blue columns, you'll see guttural. So let's look at the guttural letters. You see that Aleph is a guttural, can be classified. You have Hey, you have Het, you have Ayin, and sometimes Resh. Those letters that I just covered, the gutturals, you won't find the vocal Shava under those letters. So it's just one of the points that we're going to be talking more about in future classes. Okay, now, here's what we need to know. The Shava, the vocal Shava, can be found at the beginning of a word or at the beginning of a syllable within a word. Now I'm trying to bring you to the point where we start working on syllables once we have some basics that I've covered in classes 1, 2, and tonight in 3. Because a lot of times in these grammar books, I think that they introduce us to the syllables a little bit too early. I know for me it was kind of difficult because when I started studying Hebrew, I was on my own. I didn't have a teacher to help me through some of the tougher spots. And I remember reading things in the grammar books about making syllables, and they would introduce things that I didn't even know yet. And they would say, we're going to talk about this later, but then they would introduce me to too much. So just know that a vocal Shava is found at the beginning of a word or at the beginning of a syllable within a word. Now, when it's vocal, which is all we're talking about tonight, it makes a short, quick, abbreviated sound, okay? Almost like a hurried sound. So I'm going to spell a word to show you, to give you an example of a word that employs our vocal Shava, okay? Hold up there, buddy. All right, so if you notice, we've got the vocal Shava, which it goes here under the Hebrew letter Beit. Very good. Now we're going to move into the Resh. You see the Resh, and then we have the Yod and the Tav. Now, to make this spell the word that I want to indicate, we are going to look at your vowel chart and see what that dot is under the resh. This particular word in Hebrew, you'll notice that I'm going to pronounce this for you. It gives the sound barit. Barit. All right, and it's actually more hurried than that. So it almost sounds like, I'm going to write it in English, I will transliterate this. It's hurried to the point that when you hear a native speaker, it's almost bereet. But notice it's a very faint bereet. But you don't say it like bereet. It's more hurried. I'll give you an example in English. We would say banana. If you were spelling banana and utilizing this point, it's almost like that first syllable, the ba, would have a vocal shava. Also in the English word, if we say severe, it's a severe burn. It's sort of a quick, hurried, that's the idea, okay? So you get the point. Now, some of you have been in and around Judaism and keeping Shabbat, and you might do the blessings, and you know that the blessing over the wine, it talks about Pri Hagathan, okay? Pri, I won't spell it out, but it's very similar. We have the vocal shava. In that case, well, I mean, that doesn't take long. Let's go ahead and show you that as well. Because some of you might be able to pick this up if you haven't before in a prayer book, and you'll be so happy that you did. So let me pull out my, what letter do you think it would be to make the P sound? Okay? Now, this particular word, it's pri. Pri. And what does it mean? It has to do with fruit. So this is that particular word. But again, it's sort of a hurried sound. You don't say pari. You would spell it almost, if you're transliterating, like this. Pari. You can hear it, but it's very short, it's quick, it's abbreviated. That gives us a couple of examples. Now, one of the things that I want you to know is that every journey begins with a first step. So if I'm going to spell a word on my magic board here, and I want you to begin to look at this as I do it and see if you can sound it out. Don't worry if you can't. You will have so much practice in this in the coming weeks that you'll get quite proficient at it, I assure you. Okay. Okay, now we have our consonants. Now this is a pretty big word. Let's see if some of you already know this. That doesn't go there. Find the right vowels here. These are very handy, and I'm glad that my friend Kevin put these together free of charge for us. Isn't that nice? And one more. Make sure. Let's spell it right. You're like, well, no wonder. Now, something didn't look right. Okay? If you look at this word, this is the very first word in the Hebrew Bible, and it represents, when you see this in the text, notice this is our same sound that we made earlier when we talked about bereet, but this here, this is the bait, so you're going to have the B sound. It's got the vocal shava. So you're going to say Bereshit. Bereshit. Now this actually coalesces with the aleph, so this is one syllable. It's Bereshit. In Hebrew, this particular word is translated in most English Bibles, in the beginning. In the beginning. Bereshit is translated in the beginning. Literally, it's more accurate, I think, to say in beginning or in getting started. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. In beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Well, this is the very first word, and just to make the point, the very first vowel sound that you hear in the Hebrew Bible is the vocal shavah. Now, just to give you just something to close us out for the evening, I wanted to bring up a couple of points. This being the very first word in the Hebrew Bible, Bereshit, it's also the name of the first book of the Torah according to Hebrew speakers, according to the Jewish people, according to those who follow a more Judaic or Hebraic approach to Scripture. The first book is called Bereshit. In English, most English Bibles, as you know, the first book is called Genesis. And that comes from the Greek, Genesia. But Genesis in Greek means beginning, like a new Genesis, a beginning. So in this case, in the Hebrew Bible, the first book is called Bereshit, which means in beginning. And according to the Greek and according to most English Bibles, it also means. Now, in Hebrew, though, the second book of the Bible, which most English Bibles refer to as Exodus, in Hebrew, the Bible, the second book is called Shemot, which means names. And it begins, these are the names of the children of Israel. So it's named after, and the Bible books are named according to the Torah. The Torah books are named after a significant word that occurs early in that book. And if you recall, if you read the book of Shemot, the book of Exodus, you will find that it begins with the naming of the various children of Israel. On the other hand, the English book of Exodus in English Bibles, Exodus has to do with the departure. Now, the story does have to do, at least in the initial phase, with the Exodus, so the departure of the children of Israel from the land of Egypt, okay? Now, when you get to the Torah's third book, it's called in Hebrew Vayikra. Vayikra means, and he called. And he called. In English Bibles, the third book, same material, is called what? Leviticus. Leviticus is from a Greek word, which you can hear it. It has to do with pertaining to the Levites. But in Hebrew, the book is And He Called, and it deals with God calling unto Moses. The fourth book of the Torah, this is just to illustrate the naming, the reason that the books are named as they are. In the fourth book, it's called Bamidbar in Hebrew, and Bamidbar means in the wilderness. Bamidbar, in the wilderness. In the English Bibles, it's called Numbers. Fourth book is called Numbers because it begins with all the numbering and so forth, the count of the number of the children of Israel and so forth. And then finally, the fifth book of the Torah in Hebrew is called Devarim, and it means words. And the English name of the fifth book of the Torah is called Deuteronomy, which comes from a combination of two Greek words, deuteronomos, which means second law. And that particular name came to be associated with Deuteronomy because of a misunderstanding based on Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 18. So think about those things. Bereshit, our very first word in the Hebrew Bible, begins with the vowel sound that we finished up with tonight. It is a half vowel, and again, it's called the vocal Shavah. I think that this gives us enough material for 1 week, and I'll be happy to monitor things off and on the Facebook group page. So please, if you need some help, ask those questions. We have wonderful people that are on there that want to help, that are quite proficient at Hebrew and can help you if you get stuck. Again, look at some of these recommendations that folks are posting up, because some of the things that people are posting in the group are great apps, great different ways to learn, and some good methodology that will help you advance. Again, remember, the one thing that we don't want to do here is we don't want you to have to pay for anything. We want this to be free of charge for you. So, if you want to spend money on some of these things, it's not a requirement from us. We just want to make sure that you advance your knowledge in Biblical Hebrew. I'm looking and studying Hebrew every day. I'm trying to get better all the time, and each of us can if we work together. So thank you for joining us. I look forward to next week. See you on next Thursday at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time is the plan for Class 4 in an introduction to Biblical Hebrew. Thank you very much. We'll see you next week.